Hello, everyone. We are so excited to have you guys here to celebrate the release of Dianne Dotson's new book, The Shadow Galaxy. So a lot of you guys have known Dianne for a while. She's been an amazing friend and ally of the store, also an incredible writer. So Dianne's newest book is a collection of short stories ranging from horror to dark fantasy to like sea stories and just the whole gamut of fantasy and from dark to light. And she also has a new book coming out in the fall. It's The Inn at AMETHYST Lantern, which we're really excited about. It's a YA science fiction fantasy, but something that adults would love too, like everything Dianne does. Dianne's also written the Questrison Saga, which is a fantastic sci-fi fantasy series that has so much of herself in it. It's just wonderful, and we have all of those here. So she's been busy. And beyond that, you guys will see if you get the book, there's some amazing swag. Dianne's a fantastic artist, if you guys don't know. She does just beautiful illustrations, and you'll get some swag cards of that. We also have, as the conversation partner, Jim Pascoe, who's another friend of the store. We've been blessed to have him here a couple times, too. And his most recent book is Cotton, the White Carrot, hardcover graphic novel. They're just fantastic stories. I think if you like stories like Wind in the Willows all the way down to Watership Down, you're going to enjoy this. Not as dark as Watership Down.
I don't know, man. It's pretty dark. It's pretty dark. I actually had somebody who was sort of like, this might be the most violent children's book I've ever read. And I was like, do you know who I am? Like, what is, have you met me? But,
Jim's also worked on other graphic novels and comics, including Hellboy Animated, Buffy, just some fantastic stuff, so we really encourage you to check his stuff out. But I'm going to get off the mic now. I've been talking too long, and please give him a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who is tuning in from all over the world and from here. I guess I'll just hold this. So thank you, Jim Pascoe, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I love the store. I love you. For those of you that don't know, Dianne and I did an event right before the pandemic in which we were talking not about our own books, but about a couple of books that had the very unique theme of a pandemic. And so we're fingers crossed that we don't make any predictions tonight that cause any future harm to the entire world.
We're going to predict wonderful things happening to everyone.
Exactly.
That's what we're going to
do. Have a little bit of that special talent. So again, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to talk about this new book. I want to start by, especially being in a science fiction bookstore, reference one of my favorite writers, J.G. Ballard, who said that there is no perfect novel, but there are perfect short stories. And so I want to talk to you, or I want to hear from you about why short stories, and especially sort of positioning that vis-a-vis your recent series, which was this huge epic multi-book saga. So what was tell us about the short story form and the poems, and I feel like these are very some of them are very short stories.
Right.
So like what's the appeal? Where was your head at in making this?
So I've always written stories. I've written comics and I've written novels basically my whole life. But in between the larger epics, I was always writing in the margins, so to speak, shorter tales and some poetry, some of which you will never see in your lives because, a teenager writing poetry is quite something. But, and I'm not going to say if it's a good something or a bad something, but it is quite something. But from all of that, I was growing up in East Tennessee in a place called Gray, which is near the Tri-Cities, Johnson City, Kingsport, Bristol. And in Gray, I lived in a country, and the country is its own collection of stories because you're immersed in a place that has lots of secrets and intrigue. That's, I had a neighbor across the street who scared the living daylights out of me, and he ends up being in this book as Mr. Gerald. I changed his name. And you find out all these little secrets, and I found secret paths, and I lived next to a railroad track, and there were just all these stories that seemed to kind of bounce around in my mind because of where I grew up. And then as I grew older and I started to experience being out in the world and listening in on conversations, there was always you always had a story for every person that you meet, and I just wanted to weave all that together. Meanwhile, while I was writing all my space fantasies and my short stories and poetry, I read a lot of Ray Bradbury, and Ray, of course, writing, Fahrenheit 451, Martian Chronicles, Dandelion Wine, which is one of my most favorite books. He wrote a lot of short stories.
Yeah.
And I loved that he could play among genres. He could dance around. Stephen King, of course, The Body, eventually becoming, Stand By Me. I liked that dancing around of genre and being able to write in this tight form in which you have to world build on the fly, and you can world build from flash fiction, like the smaller stories, some of which are in the book, to longer ones like Rotor, which is in the book. So you're constrained, but you're free with short stories. You're not having to write these huge tomes to get this point across, this movement in your soul. It can be contained in a small package, and a package of several of them.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that I liked most about the book is this idea of the stories being sort of, some of them are longer, but some of them are short, and it's like it's a book of surprises,
Right?
And it feels. It feels, I want to say bigger, because it's sort of like it gives you so much. And so can you talk about the importance of secrets and surprise? And, I hesitate to call them twists, but I feel like there's a nugget of something special in each of the stories that's what drives them. Like it almost feels like they're not character driven, even though they're wonderful characters. They're not really plot driven because they're not that long. They're these jewels of surprise. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I like in some of my stories to slam a door. Do you want a soft landing? You're going to get a hard landing. There's a story in there called Hard Landing. So, but on some of them, I want to scare the bejesus out of you. And to do that, you don't get your happy ending. So there's a few of those, and you don't know what happens next, but you can assume it's not good. And, that's part of the horror appeal of the collection, because I dance between fantasy, horror, science fiction, and magical realism, some Appalachian tales, some of which are horror stories themselves. The tunnel at the end is based on a real tunnel from where I'm from that you would enter in and you would hear a scream of someone who was murdered. That was the legend. So I wrote that story, and a bit of a slam door.
Yeah.
So I like that. I like pulling the rug out from under you. There are some stories that have a happy resolution, or at least a hint that something else is coming. And for those, there is something else coming. There's one story in particular I'm writing a novel about. And that story is, well, I can't tell you the name of the actual novel, but just read the stories. You'll see that there's some questions that need answering, and others you're never going to get the answer, but assume it's bad.
Well, and I like that, because I think that there is. I mean, I love the image of a slammed door, because there were some stories that I finished that I really had this like, whoa, like that was it, and it wasn't a bad feeling. It was this kind of like gasp of like the shock of a sudden door slam, and I feel like that is, too often, especially longer books, can be sort of like, just like, I get it, like wrap it up.
Wrap it up.
And I think that it is an interesting dance. But for me, I like stories that are in your head. I like a writer that can position you somewhere and ask the right questions and leaves more of the story in your head after you've finished reading the book. And I think that that's a real achievement.
Wow, thank you. That's what I hoped to do. I want you to want more, because I don't want to overstay my welcome. I want you to go, hey, I want a whole book about that, because you might just get it. So.
with you, you never know.
It's true.
It's, just have some patience and you'll probably end up getting it. Here we are in one of the most iconic genre stores in the country. Hands up to
Mysterious Galaxy is my most favorite store, period.
So I want to ask you about your love of genre. And specifically this book, you talked about it a second ago, but this is not just a collection of genre stories. It's like wild genres that it's not just horror, romance, it's sci-fi, it's Appalachia tales, it's horror, it's these like sea shanty kind of things. I really felt like, especially at the beginning, they kind of felt like fairy tales.
Yes, there's a fairy tale element to a lot of these.
And of course I mean that as a real compliment. There's a structure that is not novelistic about these.
Right.
It is these tales and fantasies that sort of spring to life. So can you talk about genre and why that's important to you as a writer?
Well, I have to take it back. When I was talking about Ray Bradbury and reading his short stories, another thing that I read a lot of was this book of fairy tales, classic fairy tales, ancient book, gold rimmed, I wore the thing out. And what I liked about that was that it really disturbed and titillated me at the same time. Some of the stories ended very darkly, and some of them were, happily ever after. And so many times we think in terms of Disney fairy tales, most of them end happily. But, The Little Mermaid as a fairy tale did not. I didn't realize that when I first read it. So I just love the fact that with genre, you don't need to be hard and fast. You can bleed at the edges like a watercolor painting. It can blend into something else, into a new color, into a new genre, into a mix of genres, into a dance, a pirouette. It is whatever you want it to be. And that's what I wanted. It's called a galaxy. It's a shadow galaxy, and you can't have shadow without light. So there's that.
That's awesome. One of the things I love about you is how dedicated, passionate, and persistent you are at the craft of writing. It humble as a writer, I have to say, it humbles me. I am always impressed by you.
Likewise.
Thank you. Can you talk about process and what's your day like? Talk about how you approach the craft of writing.
I know I get asked a lot whether I'm a pantser or a plotter, and yeah. I know that is a common question, but I believe in carving out the time. As a working parent, I've learned over the years to just carve out that time. I remember asking Joanne Harris many years ago, I said, how did you do this? You had kids, you writing novels. How? She said, I just carve out the time. So I took that and I ran with it. Joanne is lovely and a good influence on me for sure. But I'm also a science writer, so I have to do my paid work first, and then I do the fiction later because the pay is delayed for fiction, as we all know. But I approach my writing with kind of the same sentiment as the science writing, having a deadline.
Yeah.
I'm very deadline-centric, and I'm an incredibly fast typist. So when I sit down, I intend to get as much on that page as I possibly can. So I just wrote a novel in 2 months.
Incredible.
That's on submission now to publishers, and it's an epic fantasy. So I'm jumping again. So it's got dragons in it and swords and sorceresses and things like that. But I just sit down and I just do it. You can mess up a lot of things, but if you don't get them on the page, then you have nothing. It's okay to make a mess, because that's what the editors are for, is to clean up your mess and make your books better. Thank you, editors. And so I just approached that deadline, getting it done, getting through the words, and not beating myself up if I don't do it one day or another, because life happens. Don't guilt trip yourself if you can't get your word count in for the day. I don't stick to a hard, rigid word count. I usually have a goal in mind, I want to get this done in 2 months or 3 months or whatever, and I just make it happen. I just sit down and it gets done.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know I'm not nearly as fast or prolific as you, but one of the things that I always really talk about because as a writer, I beat myself up all the time, and I'm always guilty about not doing something or not working hard enough or not blah 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 blah. But there are days that I set out to write and I write 50 words, and and my first instinct is, well, that was a waste of blah blah. No. 50 words is a step forward, and I think that I've been writing long enough that I like to think of how to live my life as a writer, not as a professional writer per se, but how to take the tools of writing. I mean, I feel like writing for me is magic, and that is the craft of it is how I create reality. And I think that this idea of being in motion and in action, living in action, it just needs to be one step at a time.
Yes.
And it's just such an important thing, and it's so great to see you just having so much success, putting out so much stuff. It's again, it's inspiring as a writer, but I think that it's inspiring as a human to see you living in action.
Wow.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. I know you impressed me because you're a Renaissance man, so you're doing so many incredible things, and I love that.
Yeah,
living fully.
Yeah. maybe a little too fully. No, we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
This book comes at a transitional time for you as an author because you just brought on a new agent.
Right.
How is that going to change your writing career?
So this book came about. I had indie published the Questrison Saga, Heliopause, Ephemeris, Accretion, and Luminiferous. It's a 4-book space epic. And I did that all myself. I did hire professional editors and cover designers. I wanted it to be as good as it could possibly be. But I knew that wasn't going to be my path for publication and writing forever because it is a lot of work. It is a great expense. You might never get what you put into it back again. But the other problem was that the distribution could only be so far, and I want more readers. So I realized that sooner or later I'd have to enter traditional publishing. And I got extremely lucky that I got 2 traditional book deals in one day, which will never happen again. And
don't say never.
I don't know. So I'd been building this collection of stories for the Shadow Galaxy. And I submitted it to Journal Stone Trepidatio, and I liked it. They said yes. And then I had written a short story called Midnight Serenade for Solarpunk magazine, which they accepted. And I said, while I was thinking about this, I invented this whole other world. They were like, oh, really? Well, send us a book proposal. I was like, okay. So I did. And they said yes. So then I had the 2 in one day, and I was literally running around like, didn't know what time it was, where it was. It was surreal. And so I was like, oh my God. So I've got 2 traditional book contracts. But then later I got an agent. And so Laura Bennett we'd been following each other on Twitter for a while, and she's with Liverpool Literary Agency in England, Liverpool. And so she was encouraging me to query. And I was like, really? Okay. So then I was querying for completely different novels than I've been working on lately. I had a middle grade dark fantasy, and I had a near future sci-fi disaster book. Wow. And I was querying for those. And I came kind of close to some agents there, but then Laura came around and offered rep. And so when she did, I said, okay, well, we're going to go through my list. I had this huge list of IP, like 70 things of different stages in several different genres. So we went through and we picked 3 different genres: a fantasy, a sci-fi, and a horror. Because I said, I don't want to be just one. I want to do it all. And so we picked a dragon book, and I wrote it in 2 months. I knew the framework because I'd already talked about it.
Yeah.
And that's the one that is now on submission. So this changes everything. Being in traditional publishing means that I am, for one thing, able to get the books out to a larger audience, which was my first goal. And they're eligible for awards, which is awesome.
Incredible.
And I could possibly get one of them adapted, too, which is another potential plus. And with Laura as my agent, I feel like, well, I already know that my work is getting in front of eyes that have never seen it before. at big publishers and wonderful independent publishers too. So I feel really lucky because she's fantastic and we work together well and she understands and champions my writing, and I can't ask for better.
I mean, that is a wonderful partner to have.
Yeah, she's great.
For sure. There's a cliche about writers that writers want to write the great American novel. But there's it's kind of like this white whale of the sort of like, and some people are crippled by it. Some people are, some people dismiss it. Some people are driven by it. Especially with somebody who has such a wide variety of interests. I'm wondering if there is a dream project that's out there for you that maybe scares you, or that you're again not ready for, but it's just like, is there that kind of idea out there that you're like, one day I'm going to write this, but maybe not right now, but I just like,
yeah.
What's your, I guess I don't want to say like what's your future plans, because we could talk about all these books that you have coming out.
Right.
I want to talk about sort of like, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Oh no.
It's like a job interview.
I'm being interviewed.
It's like, yeah, it's exactly what this is.
So I do have a project that I could make fiction, but if it's nonfiction, it's scarier for me.
Oh.
And that might happen, but
Okay.
I've not talked to my agent about that.
We're breaking boundaries here, people.
So that I've been a road trip queen for decades, and I've taken all these crazy adventures, many of them by myself, not all of them, but a lot of them, and ended up in places that I just had this pie in the sky dream, like I should live there, and then I go there and it's not quite all I expected, to put it mildly, and there's a lot of heartbreak involved. So that's a book that I think eventually I'm going to have to finish. I've been sort of writing along the edges of it, tucking little stories here and there as I remember them, just so I don't forget, in case whatever. But so that's one. And then the current sci-fi near future thriller that I'm writing now is kind of scary as well, because I'm tapping into some old memories. Because I used to work in a lab, in labs, as doing biology work of various kinds, genetics work often. And some of those memories are not great memories, but some of them are terrific. And I want this book to feel lived in. It's set in the real world. It's set in a lab, basically like where I worked. But part of the book is set in a whole other hemisphere. And it's a thriller and a mystery. So I'm blending back and forth between the two. And this one is a really risky book, and it's a very different book. And Gareth has read a little bit of it so far. My agent hasn't read it yet, but I'm working on it. That's the one that's due next.
Okay.
So I think that one, I don't know what's going to happen with it. It won't be a huge novel. It'll be a shorter novel, but I think it will be deeply unsettling. I hope that when readers read it, that you feel like you're in it with the main character. And you don't know maybe for a little while whether you're glad for this character or not. So I like digging into that sort of gray character.
Beautiful.
So,
speaking of deeply unsettling, especially as a science writer, I'm interested in your thoughts on AI, which is sort of a topic of the moment.
I have a lot of thoughts. So.
Okay, I'm going to sit down for this.
Yeah, you might want to sit down for this. So anyway, I was walking down the highway. Anyway, so AI, I have been sought out for my opinions on AI for years as a science fiction writer. 4 years ago, I had a talk about the future of healthcare from a science fiction perspective, and this was in 2019.
Wow.
So I said, I foresee that AI will lend itself to remote work and to remote health care and all these other things, and probably mental health care. Well, guess what happens the next year?
Yeah.
So we have a rapid acceleration of some of that. Some of it is ongoing. So I have opinions that there's a potential to do a lot of good with AI in healthcare without supplanting the humans that can give us our therapy, our medicine, etc. But that is where it's headed. But I'm an artist, and I don't like people using AI that steals from artists and creates something else. That isn't art. And it's offensive, and it's cheap. And I believe in paying artists. So when it comes to writing, I was asked to demo an AI writing software several months ago. And I thought, started out with it, and I was on a Zoom call with the person. I was like, oh, this is dumb. This is never. And then we got to one point, and I thought, oh my God, we are screwed. This career's over. My science writing career will end probably within a year. So I told some people behind the scenes, I said, this is coming. They were like, no. I said, I'm telling you, you're going to hear about it in a few months, and it's going to change everybody's lives on the planet at some point in the next couple of years. But for science writers and content writers, it's going to mean the end of your job. And then on LinkedIn, I see hiring editors for AI written articles. I thought, oh God, it's already happening. And then so people I know have lost their jobs because of AI written articles. And again, pay writers, pay human writers a living wage. I don't know why we treat artists and writers as if this is some hobby.
Yeah.
That it hasn't as much value as being a computer programmer. This is literally our first technologies or art and writing. As human beings, we can't afford to give it up. So AI, of course, is meanwhile being used for finding new cures at a rapid pace in biotech, which I know something about. That part I'm obviously very excited about because we need to find these things. And I think that we will have very tailored AI-driven medicine very soon, which will change the landscape of healthcare as we know it. But there's just so many different factors to this, and we need to keep an open dialogue about how it's going, how lives are affected, what happens when a lot of us lose our jobs, if game designers lose their jobs, if truck drivers lose their jobs. How are we going to support the coming wave of unemployment? Do we do universal basic income? What do we need to do? So I have a lot of opinions about AI, and I could talk about it probably every single day for the next year. But we need to be ready that changes are coming, and they're coming rapidly. And it's better to be informed and keep up to date on it, and don't be scared, but just be informed that we're in a new revolution now. Who knows where it's going to head, but it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I like hearing you talk about the power of artists, the value of artists. Obviously, it's something that's deeply important to me, not just as an artist, but as a human.
Right.
I really feel like we are living in a new vision economy where the power of imagination will have currency, and it will be the human skill of invention. Maybe it will be replaced, and maybe it'll be replaced before we know it. But right now, all the image generators are generating new images from images that humans create.
Exactly.
The chat bots that you're reading horror stories about are writing things based on things that humans wrote. And I think that we're in this wonderful hollowed bookstore. Let's never forget value of humans and human creation.
And their stories.
And their stories. I think that's so. I mean, that's a nice segue to. I think I'm a fictionalist. It's not that I don't like nonfiction. I don't gravitate toward it because I feel like fiction is truth.
Right. I agree.
And so I want to, and again, what I like about this book is that because it's so many of these short stories and these little pieces, even the poems, it feels like there's lots of moments that are true. So with that, I don't want you to spoil things, but I do want you to maybe share with your readers. Can you give us some of the things that you respond to in these stories that you've created that feel true?
Well, some of them are true. Some of them are not fiction. The Sourwood Honey days. We did that. My dad would get us in the car, drive us to Grandfather Mountain, and every autumn and get a bunch of jars of sourwood honey. He liked it with the comb in, and come back and put it on some biscuits. And so that part's true. There's some truth to a lot of it because our stories are the truest parts of ourselves, sometimes those parts that we are afraid to tell openly, but we tell it through fiction or poetry. And, there's this one moment in there, a Hollywood moment, and then that was, a memory of emotional devastation that I didn't want to hide. I don't name any names, but, I also wanted people to know that my soul bled. And there's a couple of poems that tear into that as well, that are just, Obsidian comes to mind.
Yeah.
So, I just feel like there's a lot of truth to them, even if it's set on a library on an asteroid out in the galaxy. There's love and truth and beauty and fear. And I like how, in One Evening in Fogvale, for example, you have this rather simple girl who, she's a poet herself. She takes care of her grandfather, and she doesn't really know that there might be a greater universe out there until she happens upon it one foggy night. So I wanted that sort of vulnerability of her to open up to something that she couldn't explain, but that she felt very deeply. So there's a lot of that in the stories as well. And then, of course, Rotor, probably the most heartbreaking story in the book, involving a robot.
My favorite. That's, I mean, it's like we're on the same wavelength here. Thank you for setting up all of my questions. Beautifully transitioned.
You're most welcome.
She has not seen the questions beforehand.
I have not.
This is not a staged thing. You're witnessing it live. Fiction has the power to move us in profound ways. But perhaps the most powerful is when it can show us true love. Rotor is a wonderful story.
Thank you.
It's very moving. It's surprising. Can you talk about the importance of love in your writing and in your life?
Oh gosh, the Questrison Saga is full of love. It's full of family love, friendship love, romantic love, generational love, love between robots and humans, love between aliens and humans, and so I've carried that into everything else I've written. In the Shadow Galaxy, there are romance stories in it. One Evening in Fogvale is somewhat romantic. And then Rotor being the most obvious example. But, Overdue in Deep Space, unrequited love, space libraries, which I'm very fond of, very Doctor Who, There's a few stories in there that are very Doctor Who, and one thing I love about Doctor Who is that it doesn't shy away from the different kinds of love. And so I wanted to reflect that a little bit. But my own love history, there's a story, Screens in Between, which is very much based on a situation in which we thought it was the end of the world and we would never meet in person. But we did. And reader, I married him. So.
Wonderful. I'm going to end in a rather non-traditional way. I'm going to pull some cards for you and do a reading.
All right.
We'll just do it quick. It won't be super weird, although maybe it will be super weird. Can you cut these cards, please? So for the viewers at home, we have the Wheel of Fortune, we have the King of Cups, we have the Six of Wands. I mentioned about this as a transitional time because of the new agent. We have a lot of new stuff coming. I feel like you're in a cycle. We talked earlier this evening about living in action, and I sort of feel like that action is constantly moving. I think that it's easy to think of when you're in a cycle to talk about ups and downs, but I think that when you're on a planet, when you're circling the galaxy, circling the sun in a galaxy, there is no position. There is no up or down. It's just movement. there is a man in your life that has a big heart, that is very important. And I think that this combination of the strength that comes from this, the action that you're bringing to the world, it leads to victory. It leads to a passionate, moving sense of celebration that looks to the future but doesn't end in the future. It is ongoing. So that's my wish for you.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
Questions? Come on.
Yes.
Young man in the front row.
My favorite story in the book, this is kind of unfair. I mean, I love them all. Rotor comes to mind as one of them. I really actually loved Void Mage and Topaz Sundered. And all three of them for very different reasons.
Can you? Not that I didn't like Void Mage, but I want to hear your reason for why it's your favorite.
Void Mage is... So, there's a railroad track in the story. There was a railroad track in Gray next to my house.
Okay.
And I went down that thing up and down pretty much every day, unbeknownst to my parents. A lot. Sometimes I went very far down the tracks. And that was probably not a good idea. But I had a lot of fun. I was sneaking around. So I went down this one way, and I found that there was this path in between the track and a dairy farm. And I was obsessed with this trail. I wanted to bushwhack it. I would snag my dad's axes and clippers, and I would gradually chop my way through this trail. But down further from it, there was an area that had this sort of typical dumping ground of stuff that people would throw their crap down, like the junk ravine of East Tennessee.
Okay.
A common thing. Usually you'd see tires and stuff like that. In this case, there was an old tin roof that somebody had thrown down there. There was no house anywhere close by that had one. So on the track, there's these big granite rocks, in between the tracks. So I would take one and I'd throw it and just hear that whang, that horrific crash. And then I would try with the other hand, and I'd go alternate back and forth to try to get a little bit of ambidextrous skill. But so part of that story is actually true. That happened. But I didn't summon some void mage, some demigod magician person from another realm in real life. But
that you know of.
That I know of. Well. So, in a lot of ways, Void Mage is very much like a Doctor Who story, except that this teenage girl, she's bored out of her gourd, and she summons this being from another realm to help rescue her from her boredom and take her on adventures through basically time and space. So, and, she comes back in time for dinner, so she doesn't get in trouble. But at the same time, she's learning to be independent. And I think that's one reason I loved this story, is because I often took these adventures alone because I wanted to feel independent, because I was very stubborn and I didn't want to... I was always inventing worlds and scenarios to help populate my loneliness. And in this story, she's lonely, she's bored, so she summons Void Mage, and he's there, and they go on adventures. And that was just the sort of thing I would have loved to have had as a teenage girl.
Awesome.
So.
Questions? Yes.
Some questions from the internet audience.
Yeah, we do.
All right, this one's from Ripper. With her background in science, would Dianne like to write a non-fiction book on a particular topic?
Oh, yes. I could write several. So my degree is in ecology and evolutionary biology, and while I love to incorporate that into my world building, and I wrote an article on that for the Science Fiction Writers Association.
Awesome.
I would like to write a book about different aspects of ecology, maybe one in southern Appalachia, which has a huge number of endemic species, particularly of plants, unique to that region that can be found nowhere else in the world. And I want people to be able to appreciate the night sky. I was always interested in the night sky. At one point had considered going into astrophysics instead of life science. So yes, I would love to write books about science for any age. I'm a science writer. It seems, I love to interview scientists, and the book I'm currently working on, I've talked to a NASA scientist about, and an ecologist in South America as well. So I think I could incorporate interviews and really dig into different subjects of nonfiction. I'd love it.
All right. Another question from our virtual audience from Ken. Got some of your teachings after this one. What can basics teach us about fiction writing?
Oh boy. Okay. Well, baking is basically a science. You can't just throw things in a bowl and expect to get a brownie. So there's a precision that you have to follow. You have to have a calibrated oven, and by that I mean you need a tester oven to make sure it's working properly and adjust the temperature accordingly to match it. Like my oven runs hot, so then I have to put an oven thermometer in there and get it where it needs to be and figure out that number. You have to measure things out precisely. You have to mix them without over-mixing. You have to scrape the bowl so you don't waste anything. So how does this relate to writing? Well, it's the economy of it. You have to be efficient. You have to get a product done. You have to get that brownie of a book done. And you can't just throw it in a bowl and expect it to come out. This is where AI will fail. This is where the human element of taking the time to craft something carefully matters. So really, all the ingredients are there. You just need to put them in the right order and at the right time. And just do it. Just finish it. Can't have brownies if you don't bake them.
That is for sure. I like the idea of sort of taste testing throughout the writing process. You're just you get a little bit of like how.
Oh yes, I confess to eating cookie dough. So how much say do I have projecting to my agent whether I want to write a series versus a standalone? So it's quite typical.
How much is she telling you, like,
right,
this is what you need to do for your career?
Right. So the way it works is, I would love to write a series of these dragon books, for example. There's definitely the potential to do that. But you have to get that first one right. You have to nail it, because if it stops there, if somebody buys that book, they may not want a sequel. And so you have to be pragmatic about it and set aside that particular dream and wait and see what happens. Because publishing is a business, and when you enter this side of it, when you're not an indie author, because an indie author you can do whatever you want, and I have done. But now that I'm a hybrid author moving into traditional publishing, I have to think in terms of business and what will sell. And that wavers and fluctuates. You can't really write to trend, but then again, like, agents do kind of see where things are at, because they know the editors in publishing, and they know what's coming, they know what's already been out, they know what's tired, they know what's exciting. So for example, the Dragon book, I have basically mapped out a series. It could be a 2 or 3 book series, and I would love that. But first we got to get the first one done, and it had better stand on its own, as a book that you can just read and be done with. Because that has a lot of market appeal. Not everybody does want to invest in a series, but a lot of people do. And so if it sells enough, then you get another offer for a sequel. That would be amazing. So the agent has a lot of say, because she's guiding my career, and she knows what will bring me income and what will, therefore help her as well. Sorry for the interference. Yes, Tone.
So what did you think that people were doing?
That's interesting. You mentioned some things that I wasn't aware of. And so maybe this is good timing, just by accident. I think that The interesting thing about southern Appalachia is that it is essentially a set of islands, and it has always been. And, back in the day when it was so rugged that you just couldn't get from here to there by an interstate, you had individual dialects for each little mountain town, each little holler, which is a hollow for those who don't live there. And I think that Appalachia still retains an Americana that is largely gone in our modern world. There's still a feeling like when I'm back there, I know that I can count on having a big old reunion with a big groaning table full of all kinds of yummy food in Greene County, Tennessee. And I would feel love from that food, from those acts. I know that I can go on a certain Sunday in October and lay some flowers on a grave because everybody else is doing the same thing. We stayed true to our roots and to our ancestry. I think a lot of us are feeling there's a connection there, but there's also still a mystery. It's still mysterious. There's still hollers. Some of them are dark and unsettling, and others are full of sunbeam. So I think that it seems like both a lost and undiscovered place and time. So now it's the right time to learn more about it.
Become president tomorrow.
Ooh.
What song from your high school years do you make the news?
Oh my God. From my high school years. Oh, it has to be high school. Doggone it.
Let's not date you. What song would you make the news?
College would be better. Let's see. Let me think for a second. Oh. It's going to be something probably by Depeche Mode.
I'm liking this country already.
I mean, honestly, let's just go for Never Let Me Down Again.
Ooh, yeah!
It's topical, and, I think it works in the context.
So, Michael, our internet audience would like to know, do you have another short story you want to read?
Oh, yes. Actually, I do. One of them is made of short stories related to the Questrison Saga.
Ooh.
And that's, I've got at least 30,000 words into that. So there's a lot of stories that could be told in that universe just perpetually. And at different points in time, both related to the main timeline and completely unrelated before, during, and after the events of those 4 books, which takes place over a considerable span of time. So there's those, but that's going to have to wait because that's my own thing. I do have a collection of cozy fantasies. So I had recently had published in an anthology basically sort of like an old Nordic folktale, and that was in the Winter of Wonder Fauna anthology from Cloaked Press. So in that story, I channeled Astrid Lindgren, like the Tomten stories. So I have a Tomten and a Yule stag, and it's set at the winter solstice, and there's aurora beings that I invented for that. So I've leaned into sort of that cozy fantasy where anybody of any age could read it and feel transported and charmed. There's another story that involves a lot of sentient pets in San Francisco, including some pets I used to have. And there's fairy stories. So I really would like to do that. And I also was just talking to my agent today about another collection that would be more straight up sci-fi, and that could be like an unsettling science fiction. Like there's some cosmic horror in this, but this would be sort of a less horror, but just sort of kind of creepy, but plausible sci-fi. So yeah, I could go in any direction with any of these. I love short stories, so.
I asked you about genre, but I think that we were talking very sort of broadly, and in this book there are multiple genres.
Right.
But have you gotten any pushback specifically from your agent about, like, stay in this lane? Like, you're not, like I find as somebody who has written crime fiction, essentially for adults, and then YA graphic novels, it's sort of like I've published a lot of books and they're in all different sections of the stores, and I don't mind.
It's a good problem.
But yeah, but I'm wondering because I feel like I have had people give me advice. It's with a capital A. That is sort of like keep writing those crime fiction books. That's the key to success. You know, like that's your thing. And I just feel like I am going to do whatever the F I want to do because that's who I am and that's what I've grown into. And so, again, maybe it's easy for you to be sort of like, hello, pot, I'm kettle. But do you get any pushback? Do you wonder about sort of like, you know, you had this science fiction series for these 4 books.
Right.
That I feel like you have a reputation for, and this passion of yours to just be like a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. Is it unnerving at all? Is it like where's your head at with that kind of as a business?
If Ray Bradbury can do it, I'm going to do it.
There we go.
I'm going to do it. Stephen King can do it. I'm going to do it. So, you know, I just feel like, why are we boxing ourselves into this little bitty box? And my agent knows because I have written, I mean, the Questrison Saga has science fiction, fantasy, horror, romance, all blended together. It's a story, you know, and a story is going to take turns, you know, and going to be harrowing and exciting and wonderful and quite scary or whatever. So in terms of what I've been working on, like the Amethyst Lantern has some horror elements. There's a little bit of the Thing in this future Lunarpunk utopia. There's a little bit of Wrath of Khan to it. Which is my favorite Star Trek movie. Let's just get that out of the way. Anyway, and then the Dragon Book, there is a massive cosmic horror element to it.
Wow.
And my agent's excited by it. She loved it. You know, she's open to it. She understands that going in, understood that I plan to take all the genres.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dianne Dotson. I mean, come on. Come on.
Thank you, Jim Pascoe.
Get ready, people. Any other questions?
We have time for one more question.
Lightning round.
All right, I have one more virtual then for you. This one is, how do you celebrate or decompress when you complete your novel or script?
Ooh, that is a good one.
Yeah.
And it varies with each one. But usually there is some sort of food involved. Because I'm basically like a hobbit mixed with an elf. So, usually there's food. I'll go out and I'll get something to eat. One time it was Denny's. Another time it was quite glamorous. And then, you know, I usually have to have chocolate anyway, so any excuse to have more chocolate. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome.
Everyone, let's give it another round of applause.
Thank you.
Audience, we're going to say goodbye to you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and you can still get your own copy of the Shadow Galaxy